Derek here. Today, I'm going to show you how to reduce the spring tension on your M9 gimbals beyond the factory limit. Check this out. Let's take a look at some of the tools that we're going to need. For starters, we're going to need a number 1 Phillips screwdriver to open the case. We're going to need a plastic pry tool, iPod pry tool, or a smudger. Either or will work. We're going to need some type of fine pick to remove the springs once we get inside. And we might need an assortment of pliers as we go here, small pliers. So let's get started and let's get this thing open. The first thing you're going to want to do, always, before doing any work on your radio, is remove the battery. Really simple. Pop the door and simply remove and unplug the battery. Next, we have 6 screws that are holding the case of the radio closed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Mine on the top might be a little hidden because of the stand, but we will be able to access them without removing it. So actually, let's start with those. I'm just going to take my number 1 and we're going to remove these screws. I think I'm just going to get the antenna out of the way. Load resistor, just in case. And let's try to get this radio open. Now what you're going to want to do is pull both halves apart from one another. But you're going to need to be careful because you've got a couple of switches here that are going to want to come with the case. So very carefully separate the 2 halves. Now we're going to need to remove the ribbon cables. This is where you're going to use your plastic tools. You can either use something like a smudger, and what you're going to do is just simply push this retention clip away from the body, and the ribbon cable comes right out. Just to show you, another type of plastic tool we can push with this. You can even use a plastic screwdriver if that's what you have access to. All these tools work wonderful. Let's get this apart. And we can put this half aside. Okay. So now we have the half of the transmitter with the gimbals in it. And the spring that I want to adjust is actually this one here. If you look and rock your gimbals, you'll actually see when you push it in a particular direction that an arm is going to be lifting on the spring. These are the springs that you want to adjust. They're on these silver metal arms with the hook. See? I move the gimbal, arm comes up. I move the gimbal, arm comes up. I move the gimbal, arm comes up. So these are the ones that we primarily want to adjust. Okay? And this right here, my pitch, is the one I'm not completely happy with. So let's take a look at how we're going to fix that. We're going to need to remove the spring. And this is where the pick tools come in handy. I think I'm actually going to try this little hook. You could use a paper clip or something similar if you don't have it, maybe a little piece of wire. Anything you can get in here and essentially just hook the spring off. Just like that. Comes off really easy. And that's it. I've just removed the spring from the M9 gimbal. So now you're going to ask me, how do you make it softer? It's very simple. All you're going to need to do is just simply stretch the spring beyond its original limit. And you don't want to go too far with it. As you can see on this one here, that I have a little bit of gap, a little bit of separation in between the coils. They're no longer tight. And you just give it a little pull. And don't overdo it, because you can do this and you can adjust and go back. So now that we've stretched that spring a little bit, there's an adjustment in here that allows you to increase and decrease the tension on the springs. Again, now one thing to note is you're going to want to make sure that your ends where your spring hooks, they're not bent or distorted at all. And this is what you're going to use your pliers for. Just take a pair of pliers, make sure you keep that nice and round, and that it stays as large as it originally was. Now we're ready to reinstall the spring. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take an Allen key and we're going to put the factory adjuster all the way to its lesser limit. So this is where the springs would normally be the softest. And this is going to make it easier to hook the spring back on the gimbal. So I'm going to keep going until it bottoms out. There we go. So now there's a gap in between the hook for the spring and the body of the gimbal. It'd be a lot easier to get it on. I know it's hard to see, but if you do this yourself, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Now it's time to reinstall the spring. I'm going to take my spring, hold it with my tool, or you could even use a pair of needle nose pliers. Anything you can do to help make it easier to rehook this is fine. It's going to be a little tricky, but it will go back on there. Okay, now it's on there. Now, I want to see what the gimbal feels like. And I can tell you that this is already way too loose for my preference. But that's good, because now we have the adjustment in it that we're looking for. And now I'm just going to adjust the gimbal like normal with my Allen key. I'm going to tighten the tension on that spring until it feels good. So let's see on that one. That feels pretty good. I think I'm going to tighten up my roll just a little bit. And I want to do my yaw as well. Maybe a tad less on yaw. Alright, that feels really good. At any point, if your gimbals aren't loose enough, just simply remove the spring for whatever gimbal coincides that is not at the correct tension. Just simply remove that spring and stretch it out a little bit more. That's all you have to do, is just stretch and test. If you have stretched it a little too far, that's okay. You can always go back and use the adjuster inside the gimbal to retension it a little bit. And just keep playing with it until it feels right for you. There's no wrong answer. It's all about stick feel and input. You're the only one that has the right answer for that. And I'm pretty happy with this now. They're nice and smooth. They have a linear feel where they're a little softer in the center now, and they get a little bit more aggressive. They're a little tighter towards the ends, which that's kind of nice because it gives you an actual feedback as to where the stick position is. But I like this. This feels good. So let's put this radio back together. Exactly the opposite of taking it apart. Let's get our ribbon cables reinstalled. It can be a little tricky to get them all the way in there, but once you've done this a couple of times, you probably won't have an issue with it. Just make sure it's thoroughly seated and set the clip. Just push it right back into place, no big deal. And maybe just make sure that it is secure in there. We're going to do our second cable. And we're going to want to address our switches. They should go right back in where they came out of, no problem. We're going to put the two halves back together. I like to set the bottom on the table just like this. Be careful of your wires. Make sure there's nothing inside the gimbals, nothing that can get caught or pinched. Everything looks pretty good here. I'm very carefully going to align the halves. They should go right back together without forcing them. And if they do, that's how you know everything is correct. Now we're ready to put the screws back in. Okay, now we have our screws back in. Pop the antenna back on. Let's get the battery back in. Okay, let's test it out.
Light mode, angle, rate profile, 1. Fail safe disabled.
Okay, great. The radio booted up. My sticks feel great. They're all incredibly even. I'm very happy with this. They're definitely softer than they were before. I like that. So that's it. That's how you make butter sticks with your M9 gimbals. How to reduce the spring tension beyond what the factory lower limit is. And this is how you do it. Just simply stretch the springs a tiny little bit, and it totally changes how the gimbals feel. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.